Welcome to the Art of Marketing Operations, a Taylor podcast. I'm Glenn Bottomley, and today my guest is Cassie Tucker, co-founder of Camm Media, a full-service social media and content creation consulting group focused on helping clients tell compelling stories to grow their brands. Thanks for joining us today, Cassie.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Glenn. I really appreciate it.
Well, Cassie, one of your passions, I know, lies with helping companies figure out how to bring clarity into their messaging. So can you explain a little bit more about the power in that and why is it so crucial for brands?
Yeah. So great question. I think as consumers, we're so inundated with so many different messages from brands. When we watch TV, when we're reading books, there's so many different messages, like I said, coming at us in all different directions. So the thing that is so important with marketing messaging is clarity and just being concise, because if we confuse people, we're going to lose them really quickly, and our attention spans are incredibly short. And so what consumers are looking for in any sort of marketing message that we're displaying to them is what's in it for them, and can they understand the solution we're providing as quickly as possible. So if you can clarify that down as short as possible and communicate that consistently across all of your different marketing platforms, it's a lot more impactful than having too much copy or too much content that doesn't have a clear direction and is just overall very confusing to the consumer and doesn't communicate those points that I was mentioning.
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent observation because one of the data points that I recall, and you might have the more up-to-date data here, but I believe it was back in 2012 or 2013, so almost 10 years ago, the average amount of time that a person browsing a website from their mobile device was 7 to 11 seconds. It was between 7 and 11 before, if they were confused or if the message wasn't clear, they're gone. And I believe the data now, I think the most recent thing I saw was about 4 to 5 seconds. So you really don't have that much time as a marketer and setting up that message. So to your point, it's concise and clarity just seems so key. Would you agree with that, from particularly in the mobile space?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think both mobile and desktop, it's very important, but you're right, especially when people are out on the go and they're using their phones, they're looking to find the information that they need as quickly as possible. And so a lot of that comes from the messaging side, and then also the user experience side, which I know we'll talk about here in a little bit, but both are so crucial. And then other elements like, is your website loading on time? Is it taking too long to get the information that they're looking for? So a lot of elements there, but clarity, like I said, is so huge because, again, people do have short, limited time available to them. And so if you can really connect with them and get the information to them as quickly as possible, you're going to win with consumers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point. Now, let's build that a little bit further. So in other words, once you have clear messaging, what advice can you give to marketing operations teams in terms of how they should then incorporate that clear messaging throughout the marketing operations process? How should teams actually look at that in terms of the clarity that we're doing on messaging, but across the board?
Yeah. So a lot of people are involved depending on how big your company is. There's a lot of people involved in the marketing operations process. You may have a number of different team members on the social side, the PR side, the website copy, the user experience side. There's a lot of people that we have to work together to create that consistency across the board. And so whoever within your organization is developing that messaging and clarifying it, it's important for you yourself, if you are the one doing that work, to not only understand that, but everyone across the board within your organization needs to know those data points, those content pieces, and be able to communicate that clearly on all the platforms that they're working on. So I think it kind of starts in that strategy layer, getting as many people involved in that brainstorm process, because I think also too, depending on what level of the marketing operations process you're involved in, you may have different findings that you've discovered from speaking with customers on social social media or through email or through whatever platform you're managing. So invite your team in on that process to clarify that message, and of course, ask your consumers as well. And I think also too, internally, we talk externally about communicating clearly to consumers, but also internally, the clarity comes into play as well. And so making sure that the way that you develop process internally, or the strategies and the implementation and the way that you work as a team, you can really clarify that process as well. And so everyone is on the same page. And again, you're able to externally communicate and radiate that clarity as well.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting point. And you mentioned user experience there a couple of times. That I want to dig into that just a little bit, because, if you think about it, it is one thing to have the clear message, whether it be on a website, whether it be in social media, whether it be in advertising, mobile experience, mobile app, etc. But the broader view of a user experience, however that is in your business, however that is defined, that has to be probably a very, very important component as well. So what has been your experience in terms of the best way to develop a user experience that sort of reinforces the clarity of messaging that we've been discussing?
Yeah, absolutely. So with developing your message clarity, one of the aspects of developing that process and that strategy there is defining what the core call to action that you're asking your customer to take. And I like to look at it at two ways. So you have your core call to action. So that may be schedule a consultation or buy now or shop now. And then you can also determine what your transitional call to action is. So if someone is not quite ready to make a purchase, what is that action that you're going to ask them to take in the meantime, so they can learn more about your service, your product, before they're ready to make that purchase, or whatever that core step is that you're asking them to take. So a lot of times that transitional call to action is learn more, or learn more about us, or visit our FAQ, or that supplemental information that again can kind of add value to them, educate them further on your brand before they're ready to take action. So once you determine that, making sure your website is set up with those transitional and core call to actions consistently across the board. And then I like to also make sure that those call to action buttons, so typically if you go on someone's website, you'll find that in the top right-hand corner or someplace in the top banner of a website, and repeating that across the board and making that pretty much the same action, because part of providing clarity and user experience is once you determine that action you want them to take, making sure that's communicated all across the board. So you're not asking them to take 7 different steps because that confuses the user experience. So that's a big part of it. And then 2, with setting up your website, having a very clear value proposition in your hero banner. So your hero banner is that set of an image and text above the fold, what we say on a website, that first view that you see of someone's site, again, communicating what you do, how you serve, and then have those call to action buttons in the top right-hand corner and even in that banner as well. You can also include your transitional call to action in the banner. Again, if someone's not quite ready, they have that step to take. And then throughout your homepage and your website, again, making the step to process as simple as possible. Do research in terms of what users look for when they're going through your site, what kind of information is valuable to them, and even asking the consumers what they'd be looking for in terms of your brand, and make sure that's included all across the board. As well, I think we can create this clarity and user experience on social as well. Again, everyone's so inundated with so much information. So providing a clear call to action in our social media captions is really helpful. So if we provide information to the consumer, telling them to take a specific action with that information. So if we're providing information about how our product works or how our service works, letting them know, hey, they can learn more in the link in our bio. And so again, providing that step for them. Because I think a lot of times until we ask someone to take an action, they don't quite know either what that action is we want them to take, or they don't take it because they're not being asked to. So just simply asking them and providing a clear step to take that action is just an easy optimization I think we can make on websites, social, and just across the board on any marketing platforms.
Yeah, precisely. I think that one of the things that I really like about how you have sort of structured that model is that you're really creating a cohesive brand experience in terms of how somebody is going to interact and all of the customer touch points around the brand. It is one thing, to your point, of having the concise messaging, but I like how you've sort of described how user experience reinforces that brand, because the actual experience isn't just necessarily the words that, meet our eyes from a website or from a social media post, etc. It is the overall brand experience. Everything from if it's consumer packaging, if it is a B2B or some sort of packaging. Of course, Apple is of course famous for how amazing their packaging is. But how the user experience actually reinforces the brand, because how incongruent it would be if you've got really super concise messaging, but then when you want to inquire and have more information, there's 37 steps that you have to take to actually acquire more information or what have you. It doesn't match. So I love how you sort of that even that invisible sense of the experience has to match the concise nature of your actual messaging as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said earlier, people's time is very limited, and we are by nature very impatient human beings. And so if we as brand creators and marketers can provide information to someone quickly and not frustrate them in the experience, I think that's huge. And that kind of sets the tone for their experience, like you mentioned, with interacting with a brand over time. And that's memorable too, to customers. And so if you can provide a anti-frustrating experience to consumers, I think that really sets the stage. And a lot of times too, if we do frustrate consumers, they may decide not to shop with us or not to work with us in the future because they want to eliminate that frustration from their lives.
Yeah, I sometimes look at that consumers will look at any brand and will start at 100. There's like a bank, and every sort of negative experience starts to tick down from that 100. And all of a sudden, maybe, now it goes down to 90 and then to 80, et cetera. There will reach a threshold where, a consumer or a buyer will get to a point where it's like, okay, I'll just deal with this because maybe there's no other alternative, what have you. But once it gets to below a certain point, the brand value loses its luster, and a consumer will just start to switch over. So can you talk a little bit then about maybe how you've done this with the company that you found, Camm Media? So can you share maybe a story of maybe where there was a similar struggle, how maybe you've overcome it, or maybe with a client?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So I am almost, I would say, about 4 years into building this brand, and it's developed and it's changed and evolved over years, which I think a lot of brands do. They don't stay the same as they were when they were first developed. And currently in a new iteration process now of just figuring out what the future of this business looks like. So I think it's number one is just always being open to evolving, and with that, paying attention to some of the pain points and lack of clarity that you're providing your clients and your target market. So I'm always open to just paying attention to feedback from clients, asking for feedback too. I think a lot of times we forget to just ask our clients, even if there was no mention of a poor experience, just asking them, how was the way I communicated? Was it clear? Was it straightforward? Was there any sort of confusion in that whole process? And that can help us identify, again, some of those gaps that we need to fill with either our messaging, the process for onboarding clients, providing our service. And so I've definitely been through that over years where I created a message I thought worked, and I decided after speaking with potential clients or current clients that there needed to be some adaptations there. And so I think not only being open to letting your business evolve, but also your messaging, and always be refining, especially as the market and the industries you're working in are changing. The demands and the requests from clients are going to continue to evolve, especially in the world of marketing as new platforms pop up. new aspects to those platforms are rolled out as well. And so just being open to that change, like I said. I think for me too, like we were talking about earlier, that clarity can trickle over into internal process as well, in the way that you communicate directly with your clients, not necessarily on an external basis. So one of the biggest things that I've learned, sometimes the hard way, is making sure the clarity in our contracts are clear. Again, the expectations that we're setting for a partnership with a client are clear as well. And so, like I said, that messaging is not only so important from an external basis in the way we're talking to potential consumers, but how are you communicating to those clients that are ready to sign on, work with your business? Do they understand exactly what they're receiving, exactly the service and what you're providing to them? And again, the expectations are so important. So I've had to really tailor that over time and make sure, again, that a client isn't expecting something that I didn't necessarily communicate, and vice versa. So asking questions, being open to feedback, and just continue to clarify and really hone down and get very specific on what you do and how you're serving and what kind of partnership you're going to be entering into.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot because what comes to my mind when you were describing that is it's almost making sure that you are re-engineering every one of those customer touch points. So something as simple as an invoice, something as simple as a bill, something as simple as an email order confirmation. All of those, looking at it through the lens of the customer. And, sort of one of the things that I like to do is, from the customer's viewpoint, actually look at every time that the customer interacts with your brand. Oh, here's an order confirmation email. Oh, here's the, shipping confirmation. Oh, here's what's actually in the box. Here's and literally piece it apart just as a customer would actually experience. It's one of the best ways. And to your point, it helps to reinforce the clarity of messaging, because again, how incongruent would it be if you've got super clear messaging, maybe on your website or maybe in an email, but then the invoice is extremely complex, or, the thing that's everything is a mailbox is all, handwritten, or, whatever. It just, you want to make sure that you've got that nice connection and consistency throughout the board. I think that's a really powerful message that you share.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think we focus so much a lot of times on the external appearance of the way our business looks to people. And then a lot of times what happens with brands that only focus on that, they'll welcome a client or a customer in and then realize that the consistency of service is not all across the customer journey. And that's, again, where you can frustrate customers. So ensuring that, like you said, every touch point is very clear. The level of experience is absolutely optimized to the best that you can do. And so I think, like I said, that's an ever-changing and a journey that you will continue to go on throughout your whole journey of building a business. And I think you just, as long as you're open to that and you're open to adapting and improving, I think you're going to set yourself up for success.
Well, there's a story, as you just were saying that, it comes to my mind, and I believe it was Steve Jobs. And when this was years ago, and Apple had just created their laser writer, one of the very first laser printers. And to Steve Jobs, it was extremely important to have the inside of the laser writer the logo had to be in a very specific way, even though the number of times that you would actually look at that might only be when you're actually pulling out the cartridge of, the ink or whatever. And I believe it was in his book or the Walter Isaacson's book about him, where I think the lesson was learned from his father, where he had to paint a fence. I think it was, I'm going from memory. But Steve at the time didn't paint the back side of the fence because he thought, well, who's going to say? But one of the first things that his father did was look behind the fence, which wasn't painted, and then called that out, that's not good design. That's not a good experience, even though, the customer. So it's like there's a mindset that has to be there culturally in the organization. So how have you sort of instilled that mindset at Camm Media on your team, both within your team and how you maybe drive that with other clients?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, like I said, is just really being open to that and setting my personal agenda and personal feelings to the side. I think a lot of times, whether we're building a business, creating content, whatever we're doing, we think we know the right way to do things. But until we open ourselves up to feedback, like I said, and just really asking people those hard questions, maybe even things we don't necessarily want to know the truth on, that's coming at it from a side of empathy and humility for the customer journey and how the customer would perceive our business. So I think we really have to be open to that. And also attention to detail, like you said, is so important. And so not letting little things slide, because if we start to let little things slide, a lot of things will start to slide. And if we let one thing slip through the cracks over time, that builds on top of each other. And then you're left with just an overall kind of negative customer experience. And I think setting the tone for just best quality and best customer experience as possible, whether you're working with contractors, interns, or full-time team members, they start to notice that as a leader. If you are adopting that as your value, your personal value for yourself and your business, they start to believe that themselves. And so I think you have to set an example and you have to show them how to ask customers questions and how to ask internally other team members questions. And like I said, putting our personal agendas to the side and just being open to shifting and changing, even if we think the way that we did it before was the best way possible. There's always new ways to evolve and change and to just provide, like I said, excellent customer experiences.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like, what parents are taught about their children. Children are always watching. They're always watching, and they're getting clues and keys from, in terms of behavior, from their parents. And I think that in some respect, to your point, teams do the same. They are looking to the leader, and if the leader is taking shortcuts, that's going to be considered acceptable, from a cultural perspective. So I like your dedication and drive and assurance to make sure that is not happening. So Cassie, I want to completely switch gears, because you just talked a little bit a moment ago about sort of the shifting, but right now, let's talk a little bit about podcasts, because you currently host 3 podcasts of your own. So obviously, you love the medium. So can you tell us a little bit about what is it about podcasting that you yourself love, particularly compared to other messaging mediums?
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan, as you said. It's obviously clear with that, but it's been really cool. I've been dabbling in podcasting since I would say 2020, 2021-ish. And so podcasting, I don't think a lot of us realize, has been around for a very long time. And now it's just sort of getting its resurgence. I think people are finally understanding the value and just the hype around it per se. But there's a lot of benefits to podcasting versus other platforms. And so a couple of them are, it's a really great platform to establish your authority on. So for you guys, you're able to talk about marketing operations and how you are a leader in that space and educate and communicate the value of marketing operations with your customers. And with that too, you can turn your podcast into blog posts on your website. It kind of clarifies and simplifies the content creation journey. So starting there, transcribing that, turning that into a blog post and using that for SEO building and driving awareness and traffic to your site is also a really, really great aspect to podcasting. It's also a really intimate platform, I would say. So if you do it the right way, it can almost feel like your listener is sitting at a dinner table with you and you're having a very organic conversation with them. And so they feel that connection with you as the host, and they're able to get to know you and build trust with you. And I think eventually, if you're providing a service to them or a product to them, when they go to purchase something like what you offer, the goal, if they've kind of built that connection with you, is for them to think about you as the first option to go to. And then community too. I mean, it's absolutely amazing how many people just with the podcast that I produce or am a host on, how many people we've met, especially with having guests on the show. I've built really awesome connections in the marketing space and outside of that. And I think for marketing or just connections and networking in general, asking someone to come on as a guest on your show is a lot more of an easier ask, I would say, than asking them to pick their brain or out for coffee or whatever, because a lot of times people are more than inclined to come on a podcast and talk about their experience. People love sharing that value and that journey with others. And it's also a really good lead generation tool. So if you think about your ideal customers and bring them on to your show to talk about their experience and whatever they do, again, it's kind of an easier ask than asking them in a salesy email to set up a call to learn more about their product. You can kind of bridge the gap by having them come on your podcast and, again, build that relationship and that community with them.
I really, that's a very, very good and interesting idea that you have about networking and utilizing networking or utilizing podcasts as a networking technique, because it does absolutely happen. If I think of all of the episodes of this podcast and all of the individuals that and subject matter experts that we have hosted on this show, it is very, very powerful medium for that very reason. And so I think that that's a very interesting way of looking at podcasting, because, we certainly look at podcasting as a really, really powerful aspect of an integrated marketing mix. And so when you think about, creating an integrated marketing strategy, obviously podcast is a pretty important component, but how do you also look at then physical marketing impressions as well as digital marketing, of course? But when you think of physical marketing impressions like promotional items, signage, maybe a trade show booth, your direct mail piece, et cetera, how do you look at integrating physical marketing with the digital to create that integrated strategy?
Yeah. So great question. I think depending on your objective and going back, whether it's, like you said, a trade show or whatever the reason for creating that physical marketing element, think about what is the goal with that piece? What are you trying to drive traffic to in a given period? And what can you create that really, again, hits that clear message home when someone receives that piece of marketing, that it communicates exactly what you do and how you serve again. And so I think with that too, once you define what your goal is, let's say you want to build your email list, thinking about what can you do with that marketing piece to drive someone to your email list. So I know QR codes are a big deal right now. So can you create a QR code that drives exactly to your lead magnet or your lead generation tool and get someone on your email list? But with that, making that journey as clear and as concise and simple as possible. So if you do want to drive someone to your email list, don't make them go to this page and then have to click on another page in order to get there. So setting up, if you have to, simple landing pages that go directly to that page that you're trying to get them to is really important. I think another thing that we can do that really sets a great tone in a customer's mind with these in-person events, for example, is creating content specifically for those event attendees. So one thing that we'll do is we'll put together some sort of print piece, and they go to a page or they receive an email that's specifically tailored to them in the event that they attended. So let's say you go to Podcast Movement, the conference, and someone scans the QR code to join your email list, maybe writing an email that thanks them for attending the conference and asking them what they thought about the conference and engaging them that way. So again, really clarifying your goals and then creating pieces that can get someone on one of those platforms to engage with your brand. Because, to print pieces, if you're handing out some sort of element to them, those can kind of get lost over time. So asking them to go ahead and visit your website, get on the email list, follow you on social media is really important. And then I know too, experiential events is a big thing in the world of marketing. So how can you kind of weave in your brand story and your brand appearance and look into the booth you're creating, creating, how can you allow them to interact with your brand at those events in new and intriguing ways? Because again, I think that really stands out with the customer and gets them talking about it even after the event.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's really evident in your answer there is the integrated nature of it. You know, a QR code on a printed piece that goes to a digital, a social media post that draws people to a physical event. You know, so there's a blend there, and that sort of interconnection that you're recommending between the physical and the digital. That's a really powerful connection between the two. And to your point, it essentially is really just extending the number of touch points that your brand has an opportunity to connect with potentially a new consumer, a new buyer, a new influencer across the board. So I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Cassie, what's your vision then for Camm Media, and where do you want to be in 5 years, and how are you thinking of using, really good marketing operations to help you get there?
Oh man, such a loaded question. Well, like I said before, I am kind of working on this new iteration of what this brand could look like. I'm going through kind of a transition in my business where I'm reimagining the services I can offer, really expanding outside of social into different channels and platforms that I can provide that service in. And the kind of thread that's going to weave throughout all of those different offerings, whatever they may be, is that clarity of messaging and clarifying the user experience. So that's going to continue throughout those channels. I love email and I love podcasting. So being able to offer social strategy, podcast, and email strategy to just amplify a brand's message as a whole is something that I'm looking to do. So just kind of adding in those different offerings. So I'm working on that right now. But I think outside of that is just really getting honest with myself and real about what my strong suits are not in, and building a community of professionals and people who really do a good job in those areas that I can call on and lean on and collaborate with in different projects. So I think that's huge. And that also comes into what we talked about with marketing and using podcast as a tool. I've met so many different marketing professionals who do a way better job than me at creating TikTok content or using these different platforms. And so if a client comes to me and asks me if I offer those services, I don't have to say yes and maybe offer a subpar service. I can bring in someone who does that better than me and collaborate with them to, again, just offer the best experience possible for them. And I think ultimately for me in 5 years, I just hope I continue to be known for the customer service I provide, the relationships that I build with my clients, and just being very intentional about those partnerships and just providing the best quality of service that I can.
I like that a lot. I think that's, I really appreciate the earnestness in your response and your focus of continuous improvement and aligning your own goals and skills and surrounding yourself with people who can help you get there. I think that's really, really good, and I commend you on that. So before we wrap up today's episode, though, what is the main takeaway that you want to share to help understand the challenges facing marketing operations executives today?
Oh, yeah. So 2 things, if you don't mind. So number 1 is just, like I said, ask questions, really tying up the topic we discussed today and clarifying your message, not being afraid to just ask. And if you think double check and just speak to people outside of yourself and really, again, work to clarify that message. I think the other thing in the world of marketing is we want everything to be so perfect when it goes out. And so one of the things that I've learned is not to try to over justify and just do and try and test. We can try messages out there and always refine over time. And ultimately, I think another fear that people have is if something flops or doesn't do well. A lot of times when something doesn't perform well, we are the only ones that notice. I bet most people out there are not paying attention to how well a piece of social media content performs or if a podcast does well. We are overanalyzing that ourselves. But unless we actually try and test different things and different ways of messaging messaging or different ways of marketing, we're not going to know if that's a viable option for the future or not. So I would say if you're thinking of trying something or you're thinking of testing a new unique idea, just go for it and ask questions and ask people for their feedback. And you can always optimize and change over time and test something else. And none of that is permanent, but just trying to do the best that you can do. And with that comes from, again, being vulnerable, asking questions, being humble with the way that you approach your brand and marketing. And I think you'll see a lot of good come from that.
That makes perfect sense. Well, that wraps up this episode of The Art of Marketing Operations. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cassie.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, until next time, stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to The Art of Marketing Operations, brought to you by Taylor. Don't forget to hit subscribe in your favorite podcast player. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and share. Until next time.